I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be doing this. I wish Elaine were here today, but since she isn't, I can say that as a former student of Elaine, having sort of lived with this show for the last several months has convinced me all over again of the sheer genius of Elaine Gazda as a curator. This is the most carefully orchestrated show imaginable, and you all are here to experience it. Jim, three exhibition space is on, but for the rest of you, have any of you ever been to Oplontis? All right. Elaine, I was going to say, Elaine has converted you all. It's excellent. Well, as you know, it's an incredible villa, and the treasures that you see around it are from so-called Villa A that now can be visited. It is the largest Roman villa on the Bay of Naples that we've ever found. 99 excavated rooms, and they think that's only half of it. So really, as some have said from the very start, when the excavation first started to take place in the mid-60s, that it's really on a kind of imperial scale. There are locals who are devoted to the idea. That is the Villa of Pompeii, Nero's ill-fated second wife, whom you may know from Monteverdi opera fame. And the one piece of evidence we have to tie Pompeii to the spot, other than that her family did come from this area of the world, is an amphora that's right across the room there that we're going to be looking at in just a few minutes' time. Trust Elaine to have it here in the exhibit. And it has a painted inscription on it that says, "Tu Secundus, slave of Pompeii." And so Pompeii, presumably, at least was here once. I used to think it was her favorite vintage. When John Clark, the current excavator, was here in March, he revealed to us that they tested the contents of the amphora just a couple of years ago. Turns out that it's the stinky fish sauce garum that was actually in the amphora that was found at the villa.
Which is valuable material.
Very valuable material. More precious than the best wine.
Right.
So indeed, this was a life of luxury that was lived at this villa. Leisure and luxury, the sort of head of the title of this wonderful exhibit, are well justified. And indeed, as soon as the villa started to be excavated in the mid-60s, it was apparent that this was a very, very sumptuous villa indeed, whether or not it's an imperial villa. And some 55 pieces of sculpture, some of which you see around you, were excavated on site. We know exactly where they were found. That's very rare for a Roman site, sadly, today. And moreover, we know, as you'll see from the magnificent model, the Vicky E model and plan behind you, it was a Wilhelmina Yashemsky garden excavation. She was a pioneering garden archaeologist from the University of Maryland who learned to make root casts and to work with scientists to sample pollen and soil samples so that we know with absolute accuracy exactly what was planted at the villa, and the villa is now in the process of being replanted according to that scheme. How sculptures were juxtaposed with plantings, all of that is known from this site, which is a pretty amazing thing in and of itself. Also a myriad of frescoes, some of which have been reinstalled on the site. Those of you who've been to the site know this. But indeed many fragments that had not been part of the restoration when in 1980 basically the money for the excavation gave out and the decision was made that all the sculpture that you see around you, in part because there was so much of it, and all the wall painting fragments that you see around you, there was no place for them in the Naples Museum, and so they went into storage, and they have been in storage all this time, since 1980, I in fact saw them in storage as a graduate student with John Darnes, the director of the American Academy in Rome. He basically said, have a good look, you're probably not going to see any of the rest of this stuff again in your lifetimes. And he was practically right, but here they are today, in the galleries at Smith College, which is pretty remarkable and is really in large part thanks to Elaine and her wonderful planning for this exhibit. Without that, it would never have come to be. Indeed, what it exemplifies is exactly the diversity and life at all levels that was lived in this villa. Wall paintings from the core of the villa, which start from about 50 BCE or so, painted by the same school of fresco painters as the Villa at Boscoriale. If any of you have been to the Metropolitan Museum in New York and seen the Roman frescoes there, you know those well. Same school for the early paintings. And indeed, many of those are restored on site today. These fragments, however, belong to two very interesting rooms in the villa. This one especially from room 15, which is a giant dining room with a polished tripod on one wall. Those of you who've been to the site know there's one excavated wall that's been restored there. The other wall remains unexcavated because it's underneath a modern building above the site. These fragments, however, were blown from the unexcavated wall to the foot of the wall that has been restored with the force of the volcanic eruption. John Clark and his Oplontis project team has been able to reassemble them so we can know something of what that unexcavated wall actually looked like, a mirror image of the wall that we have. So those are a pretty amazing group of fresco fragments. And so too those against the far wall, which are from the atrium of the house, a grand entryway. And we know in fact that this is from the sort of third tier of that entryway, that the roof was actually restored too low. It was actually an even grander space than was known when the villa was first excavated. Behind you is a restored room that started off like the Faculty, which is one of the cubicula of the house, so-called. A small room for sleeping, yes, but also for receiving friends and guests. And it gives you an idea of what one of the intimate spaces in the house would look like. And if you enter into that chamber, a very popular one with students, you'll hear the sounds of fountains and birds and two people speaking very quietly in Latin. So it's a complete surround sound experience. I recommend it, especially because the couches are modern and quite comfortable. It was one of those very popular study spots all semester long. So again, a range of the wall painting, lots of garden paintings in this villa where there were many gardens, and also a myriad of fragments, as we'll see moving into the gallery in just a moment, where you can really see the hand of the artist right up close. Some of the studio art students were particularly taken with some of those painting fragments. Let me talk for just a minute about the sculpture as well. Romans had a great taste for comparison of pendant sculpture, so two busts of Hercules, the beautiful winged Nike in the center. She's missing her wings, but as you go by, notice the holes in her shoulders where the wings would have resided. She has a sister that also comes from the same site. They were out by, as were the Hercules, is out by the large reflecting pool in an addition that was added to the villa in the early imperial period. Her sister, sadly, is headless now, so the one with the head is the one that made the trip, and it was a wise curatorial choice. But she's an amazing figure. Probably would have held a palm of victory in one hand and a crown in the other. She appears as if she's just alighting on the earth. Another pair of the two centaurs, male and female, that you see here flanking that statuette of Venus. These are sort of two of four that were found at the villa, male and female, two female. As you know, centaurs are a lusty lot. And the male centaur, you'll see, has a carcass thrown over one shoulder, has Hercules' club in his hand, and looks like the lusty fellow that he is. The female centaur are relatively rare, I might add, in the 1st century CE. He is the peacemaker of the family. She has a tortoise shell underneath one arm. That's a part of the lyre, so she's the peacemaker. And these two would have been, with their other two compatriots, a part of the fountain grouping in the early imperial era. Just like Pompeii and Herculaneum, the villas at Oplontis suffered from a devastating earthquake that happened in 62. And at that point, the villa's connection with the aqueduct was severed. And so they went from being fountain sculptures to being reassembled. They've been damaged. You can see some evidence of ancient repair on them. And became just garden sculpture out along one of the garden pathways in the villa. So sculpture of a variety of different types. Over in the far, on that far wall, are remains of statuettes really of deities that were part of the Rolarium, a part of the family worship shrine that was in the service area of the house, in the slave quarters of the house. Also some glass vessels. Blowing glass was a new technology in the 1st century, and an incredible object on the other side, a terracotta incense burner, which was also from the slave quarters of the house by the Rolarium family shrine. It's quite common to have family shrines in areas where cooking was going on. Anything that fell on the floor was the property of the Lares, the family spirits. And again, worship would have gone on there for all the family, not just slave members of the family, but elite members as well. Like all villas on this scale, this would have been a villa where people were in residence, the owners were in residence, probably very briefly, likely in the hot summer months when Rome was malarial and pretty impossible. And it would have been the staff, the slaves, that would have been the full-time year residents. Of course, during the high season, it would have been not just the slaves and the owners that would have been here, but guests who would also bring their slaves, because of course you couldn't be without your slaves. And when you pass into the next gallery, you'll see a wall that was somewhat freely painted by students with so-called zebra striping, which all up and down the long walls that you'll see on the model when you go over there to have a look at it. Those walls are all painted with that kind of zebra striping. Some think it's a kind of visual koine to say that anybody could pass here. It would be particularly important for the slaves of the household to know, but also probably even more important for the slaves of visitors to know that this was a passageway that all could use. So it's a little reminiscence that you'll see as we pass through there. I'm going to ask in a moment for all of this to sort of move into the next gallery, but I also want to point out 2 things before we do move. One, that there's an amazing painted ceiling behind the Nike or Victory that you should have a look at. Also, marble flooring in the new addition to the house. This is marble that comes from all around the Roman world, different colors of marble. It would have been tremendously expensive, and again, sort of suggests the level of luxury that this villa once had about it. There's also, in addition to painting fragments that you should have a look at, there's a marble sundial from the slave quarters of the house. Got to know what time of day it is to make sure that the evening meal is on the table at the right moment. But it's a wonderful sundial that has some traces of paint still on it, as well as its gnomon, its bronze staff that allows for the telling of time. So definitely also something to look at. I will say, while we're still here and talking about the luxury villa, Villa A, because we're about to look at remains from another site just a few hundred meters down from it, called now Oplontis B, for reasons that we'll talk about when we get into the next gallery. It's the case that Villa A, for whatever reason, in 79, at the time of the eruption of Vesuvius, was unoccupied. There are some who in fact, even go so far as to suggest that it was a villa that was not only unoccupied, but in the process of being dismantled. There are statue bases without statues. There is good evidence for some of the marble flooring, this very, very precious material being plied up, presumably to be sold. There are others who say that those column capitals across the way, some say, who want to see the villa as under restoration, that they would have been up on scaffolding, about to be installed when the eruption came. Others say that they were being taken down from columns and being put on the market. So you can take your choice of theories at this point. Villa A, there's one wonderful published volume, and there's a second one. They're both born digital publications put out by the American Society of Learned Society, ACLS, that will also publish eventually Oplontis B as well. So this was a villa that wasn't occupied at the time of the eruption, so no victims here. We'll see it to be very different in Oplontis B. Yes?
What was the pool
Huge reflection pool. It's actually deep enough for swimming, and so we think it probably in the hot summer might have been used for swimming. It has a drain, so it could occasionally be drained and refilled. It's freshwater pool, not salt water. But of course, the villa was right above the sea, as we'll talk about at the very end of the tour, about 80 feet above the sea. So the salt water was very close by as well. But it's a reflecting pool, swimming. Many of the sculptures that we see here were aligned along that pool too, so you've got multiple reflections of the sculpture in the water. Yes?
Once the connection with the aqueduct was broken, what did they do for water?
Yeah, very good question. Wells for daily household tasks, although I don't know that one has been found. That the common method in Pompeii and Herculaneum both was to have cisterns to collect rainwater for household use, not for drinking.
It must have been hard to get fresh water that close to the coast.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think water must have been a real problem after 62. And again, that the villa was abandoned, by 79. Of course, the Pompeii and Nero theorists say, well, Pompeii and Nero are both dead, well before the earthquake. There you have it. It will be debated, I think, for a long time to come. It makes it all more interesting. Okay, then let's move through here and go around into that next gallery, and I'll give you a chance to get a little closer to some of the things we've been looking at from afar. What we're going to see here is the sort of absolute opposite of the abandoned luxury Villa A. We're in what used to be called Villa B. It's now more often called Oplontis B, because it wasn't really a villa at all. It was instead a vast wine emporium for the transport of wine, of olive oil, and of garum. And you see before you its sort of central portico, where amphoras had been stacked, having been washed and inverted to drain. You see 3 examples of amphoras here, each a different shape, each from a different place in the Roman Empire. John Clark, when he was here to give the Lehmann lecture this year, pointed out that published statistics on the amphoras from Oplontis B say 34, 43 amphoras. Instead, they did the official count last summer. It's an astounding 1,300 amphoras that were found on this site. So this is a site that was very, very active right up to the day of the eruption itself in trading in those very, very lucrative products. Now this is literally 300 meters from the luxury villa. We know from Yashemsky's excavations, but also from her soil and pollen analysis, that although it remains unexcavated, Villa A, the luxury villa, did have vineyards and also olive groves. So this may have been a distribution center for those, but clearly this is a business that was on a far larger scale than that. And again, active right up to the last day before the eruption. That this was an entrepreneurial center is clear. The living quarters were likely up on the 2nd story. Again, from all we can tell, this was a pretty luxurious life that was lived here in the entrepreneurial center as well. Sort of a most amazing attestation for that resides right around the corner here. To have a look at an object that is, I think, absolutely astounding. This gigantic strongbox, those of you who've been to Pompeii know that strongboxes, if you had the wherewithal to own one, you put it right smack dab in the atrium of your house so everybody could see that you were a person of means. This is a strongbox, however, to end all strongboxes, and as already has been wisely discerned, there's actually a Greek inscription on it, and the epigraphy from the Greek inscription, it names the artisans who made this, and from the epigraphy itself, it's known that this was a sort of antiques roadshow piece by 79. It was in fact made in the late 2nd century BCE. So indeed, it had been around for a long time, and presumably by a family who'd been in the wine trade for a long time too, because you'll see down here a Silenus mast that's surrounded by a sort of garland that's made of grapevines, and again, the decoration on this chest, it's got lead, it had a wooden core, which has to have been restored, of course, but it's sort of lead and then decorated with copper and gold and silver and bronze. So a very, very, very elaborate strongbox indeed. It's one of the few strongboxes where we know was actually found in it. Any guesses as to what was found in the strongbox?
Spices.
Spices, actually, in fact, darn close. Perfumed unguents were one of the things that were found. Absolutely. Anything else? Money, right? Definitely money, yes. Coins, pieces of 8, yeah. Sesterces. But also jewelry. I suppose that, I think spices or perfumed unguents are perhaps the big surprise, but definitely this was carefully guarded material. There's already been a small write-up of the locking mechanism that was used here. As you can see, there are all kinds of visual precautions. Those two fabulous dogs seemingly reclining on those giant paws. You get around in front of them and you'll see that their eyes are wide open, so it's touch if you dare. One duck, there would have been another duck over there, a little Eros figure, a lion. The process for Romans were masters. They were inventors of the padlock, amongst other forms, and they were master locksmiths, and this would have been a locking device like no other. You had to pull up that female tondo at the center. Under it was the keyhole. Put the key in, manipulate the key. Still couldn't open the thing. It had a bar, amongst other things, that ran back and forth. You can see the insert points for those. So to actually get the lock successfully open, after you've done the manipulation with the key, you had to go down and pull on the ring in the lion's mouth, and then manipulate not the figure on the right, but instead this little Eros figure on the left. You have to give that a twist, and then finally the lock would open. It's a combination lock of the most sophisticated sort. So certainly they kept things well under lock and key. This was found crushed in the portico of the house that you saw the photographs of a moment ago, probably having fallen from the second story and reconstructed here. But again, it attests to the wealth of this entrepreneurial center. No question about it. The debate over who owned the entrepreneurial center is one that we'll talk about in due time. I just want to point out while we're in this corner that there are many, many signs that just like at the luxury villa, life was good here. So that we have things like a bronze lampstand and a bronze lamp, some really totally exquisite glass. This is definitely, we're coming over and seeing this little blue amphora over here. It's just exquisite, and that beautiful picture back there, as well as glazeware and other things that says that again, life was not bad here in the entrepreneurial center either. This joins, of course, with sort of evidence of the workaday world. In that case behind you, when you go past it, you'll see things like a pitch pot. The amphoras that were going to be refilled with wine were lined with pitch, so wine probably tasted a little like modern Retsina. And then that little pot back there, that little terracotta pot with the two handles. That's a paint pot. You can actually see some of the red paint on the exterior of it to paint dresses on amphoras, just like we'll see in a moment's time. Secundus, slave of Pompeii's name is painted. There are also a series of market weights there, as well as some bronze table vessels, a bronze lamp, and the like. And that object over there with the writing on it is actually a bronze seal, which says Lucius Crassus Tertius, perhaps one of the owners. That's one theory of ownership that's been put forward of this entrepreneurial center. It is the case, since this was a place that was right on the sea, ships were coming here every day. It was a place where probably on the day of the eruption, people thought that if a ship was going to make it through anywhere, it would have made it through to Oplontis B. And sadly, in this entrepreneurial center, in the back of it, ultimately, 52 bodies were found, along with all the lighting implements that they had. So the bronze lamps that you see here and here and here, those were all found with the skeletons of the bodies of those who were waiting for a ship that never came. And those 52 people and the forensic examination of the bones are happening just this summer. In fact, just this morning, saw on the internet that some of the forensic examination is complete, and they now know that for the most part, although people were in relatively good health, they had really, really poor dental hygiene. So there we have it. Too much of the good life, I suppose. And there we have it. But again, I think much more is going to be revealed about this population. We already know quite a bit about it, though, because as you'll see in the next room, there's a drawing of the skeletons as they were found, and one group among them had significant possessions. In fact, one young woman who became a fascination for Smith students, so much so that a one-act play was written about her, and also a graphic novel of one scene of the play. She's a young woman. She's called Skeleton 27. She had 11,000 sesterces with her, which is quite a fortune, as well as some really, really significant gold jewelry. We'll go around the corner and have a look at this. It's a pair of match pearl earrings that are considered the single most valuable jewelry object that comes from the Roman Bay of Naples, because match pearls were so rare, and as you'll see, they were absolutely exquisite earrings, as well as a number of other things, an emerald and gold necklace, snake rings, and the like. So a number of the best pieces of jewelry and this small fortune were hers. There's at least one scholar who's put forward the theory, since we know that women sometimes owned entrepreneurial centers, that she may have been the owner of Oplontis B. Time will, and more scholarship will certainly tell. One of the things that made her so poignant, I think, for the Smith students was that we do know that she was a young woman in her early 20s, so very, very close in age to them, and she was 8 months pregnant. So indeed, she and the soon-to-be child died with her. So indeed, sort of human tragedy is a part of Oplontis B, but so too this amazing treasure trove of gold jewelry and coins. And I must say, I'm going to let you, because it's a small room, go around to have a look for yourselves at the coins and the jewelry. But I'll just point out that the coins are the jewelry is dazzling, but the coins are also quite amazing in that there are some very contemporary gold coins, but they range in time really from the late 2nd century BC on, and some of them show real use, so they haven't been hoarded, they instead had been circulated, but were clearly a part of this young woman's fortune that she had with her the day that she died.
Was this buried in ash? And
this was buried in not only in ash, but also in those little lapilli, just like Pompeii.
so they just removed the ash and found this?
Well, I removed the ash and reconstructed a lot for example, had to reconstruct the check and re-erect some of the colonnade. It's still a pretty precarious colonnade, so it's not frequently seen by visitors today, but yes, really mountains of lapilli and ash. When you go to Villa A today and see how far below the level of the modern city it is, all of that would have been this mountain of lapilli and ash that had to be removed to sort of free these two sites. Absolutely.
How to get into the strong box? Or did it break apart as it fell?
It shattered and was found shattered, so it had to be reconstructed. A number of Roman locks are extant, and the lock expert who wrote the catalog entry, the strongbox has been on display before. Naples knowing a good object when they see it, and the catalog entry includes this piece on the locking mechanism. So it was an expert on locks who were able to discern from what was left how the lock worked, and that it was just that elaborate a lock, which is pretty incredible. I agree. Yes.
The glass picture is so beautifully clear.
I know.
I don't know of other pieces of clear glass.
I've seen very few. I have to say, I've seen Roman glass all over the Roman world, and that vessel is just extraordinary, like that little blue amphora.
Is there anything known about
Why?
Yes,
No,
how it came
not
about.
again. Although the catalog for this show does have entries on all the objects. Often, in many instances, it's their initial publication, and the definitive study of Villa B will is still awaited. So much to be learned, but it's an extraordinary vessel. I agree. Yeah, absolutely. It's underpublished, and I don't know what it is, but I trust both Elaine and John when they say that there is evidence for living quarters there, as well as in the immediate vicinity, because clearly an enterprise of this scale would have taken a lot of workers, both freedmen and slaves, probably that also needed housing. So there are other sort of living quarters in the immediate vicinity. Other things. Well, let's go through and have a look at the gold then. And as you'll see, there are other things besides the jewelry and the coins. Other things that people must have grabbed as they left. The dice are one of the things that fascinate students. They want to know whether one of the dice is loaded. She was wearing some jewelry, carrying others, and she wasn't wearing the pearl earrings, for example. But then you wouldn't be wearing the pearl earrings during the eruption. You wouldn't imagine. The collection itself suggests that this is someone of importance, unless of course she's the slave who's carrying it for her mistress, who has nothing on her. Who knows? So maybe let's move down towards the amphora and some of the objects from Villa A. That seal over in the case, Tertius' seal is definitely one, but there are other seals that are simply rings that Augustus had on various times over his life. Alexander the Great is his seal image. Sometimes the Sphinx. Various signs to say yes, to say this is mine and I matter. So I have to say, one of the things that, besides that beautiful incense burner, which everybody should have a quick look at behind you, and which is just such an extraordinary object. You see representations of them in wall painting all the time, but it's very rare to see one, and especially one on that scale. But I also have to say that I really appreciate another of Elaine's wise decisions in curating this show, an inclusion of the material culture remains of Villa A, the luxury villa, as well, so that the lives of the slaves as well as the lives of the elites are really present in the exhibit. So there are loom weights back there, a mortar and pestle with the grinder in the form of a thumb, flower pots. Some 83 of these flower pots with the holes in the bases were found on site, so they must have employed sort of whole cadres of gardeners as well. And then of course the famous amphora. Unfortunately, there's like a protective layer that's been painted over the inscription. If you look very carefully over on the side, you'll see that 1A escaped the protective paint, and you can see a photograph of the inscription down here. If anybody has a cell phone, I will also say, if you get it under raking light, you can see underneath the protective coating as well. So anyone wants to try that, it's fair game.
Why is it famous?
Why is it famous? Because this is the one that has the inscription that says, to Secundus, slave of Pompeii. So it's the one slender piece of evidence that we have that ties the villa, or Pompeii at least, to the villa. I will say that Pompeian houses have been named on slighter evidence, so it's not such bad evidence, but again it's still a matter of contention. From what we know of slave households for people like the first empress Livia, the roles within the household, there was a hierarchy of slaves, especially for household slaves, no question about it, and a myriad of different roles. Gardeners included, house stewards, hairdressers, you name it. They definitely were part of the staff. I will say this case too has haunted me. It will continue to haunt me. All of these lighting devices, I think we don't think enough about just how dark night was in antiquity. And if you've been to the desert far away from civilization, perhaps know how dark, or friends who come from Maine always say there are stretches of Maine where you really can experience the dark. Tyrrhenum even, in fact, is probably far enough away from sources of light pollution that you can see that night effect there. But again, dinners lasted for a very long time, from late afternoon sometimes into the wee hours. So these very large rooms probably require these very large lamps filled with oil, wicks at either end, and would have provided flickering illumination. The lamps themselves are beautifully chosen. This one, as you can see, has a winged Nike, just like the Nike across the way. Or here, a scene involving the goddess of love and beauty, Venus, who's in that statuette over there. Here's a kind of naughty scene on an individual lamp that you can come over and see involving Eros whipping a little boy, and then Jupiter, the sky god, on this one. So all kinds of possibilities here. And I must say the little humble personal ones with the signs of burning are ones that just really touch my heart. I think about those long corridors that we'll see in the model in just a second. And before the earthquake of '62, Oplontis was of course equipped, as many houses in Pompeii were, with a latrine. So if you were trying to make it down the hall at night, you would definitely need one of these little devices to make that passage. And again, that sort of clear evidence of burning on them suggests that these were personal devices that were much used. So indeed, that sort of sense of immediacy of life in the villa, I think, very much here in these objects. And it's, again, I think sort of brings us full circle back to the luxury villa, which included these things as well as the beautiful sculpture and frescoes that we saw at the beginning. And sort of everywhere you look, you'll see something up above the model. There are some wonderful terracotta figures that would have appeared along the roof. Some fragments from the villa are sadly orphans. When they got put into storage, where they came from wasn't recorded. So that absolutely beautiful painted colonnade fragment that's over on the wall there, we still don't know where it comes from, but it is a remarkable painting. And if you go over close to it, you can actually see where the artist has drawn trace lines to follow to create the sort of illusion of that wonderful colonnade. And I will say that although these things, as we said when we first got to the show, are going back to storage in Italy, the town hall is now displaying at least one work of sculpture from the villa at Oplontis, and there's hope that one day there will finally be a museum on the site, so all these things will be in evidence again. Elaine has also said that storage has been improved, so they go back to a better place from which they came. That's good. Indeed so. And I will also say there is an excavation afoot at Villa A, again, for the first time since 1980. Through soundings, they were able to tell that the villa, on a cliff 80 feet above the sea, had its own individual harbor, and that's inspired the superintendency to actually destroy a Carlo Moderno canal that had been abandoned centuries ago, but to excavate the seaside, the cliff facade of the villa, so you'll be able to see eventually where the harbor would have been. It's now all silted in today, but nonetheless where the harbor would have been and what the approach would have been to get up the hill from the harbor where you would arrive by sea to the villa itself, and that should be pretty extraordinary. So worth a trip back to Oplontis to see. And with that, I think I will bring the tour to a close. So thank you all so much.